All right. Well, welcome to our June 2023 Abbeville Institute Zoom webinar. We're really pleased to have a tremendous guest tonight, Ben Cooter Jones, on to talk about Southern humor. And I don't know if I can really introduce Ben properly. He's just a wonderful man. Of course, if you were from my age, I grew up watching the Dukes of Hazzard, so this is just a lot of fun for me. And I know a lot of y'all did too. I met Ben a few years back. We had a conference and he registered for it and came out. And I remember I looked at the attendee list and I said, that says one Cooter. I wonder if that's Ben Jones. And he came out and we had a grand time. And then we had him come out and speak at one of our events. And it's just been really fun having him around and being participating with the Institute. He's written a couple pieces for us. And of course, he is most famous for being on the Dukes of Hazzard, but he's also appeared in various other television programs and stage. He's been in the theater. He's, of course, a great musician. He's also a former congressman from Georgia. And I like his story. He talks about that. He used to ride the General Lee down there in Atlanta. Nobody cared back then. Now, of course, I guess that would be different. If you rode the General Lee through Atlanta today, it might be a little different scenario. But I don't know. I think a lot of people would still love to see it. But we're going to talk about Southern humor tonight, and he said he's going to wing it and tell some stories. We'll have a conversation, but just a couple of things. If you want to ask a question, there's a little Q&A button down there. You can click on that, and of course, you can ask a question that way, and I'll filter through. Also, you can put them in the chat window. So if you want to ask a question there, you can do that. This is being recorded, so it will be on YouTube. Probably tonight or tomorrow, we'll put it up there so you can watch it again if you would like to. But remember, all of these things exist on your generous contribution. So if you like these webinars and our programs and our website and all the stuff we do, please consider a donation to the Abbeville Institute. Just go to abbevilleinstitute.org and you can donate and help us in our mission to explore what's true and valuable in the Southern tradition. And of course, humor is a huge part of that. Southerners like to tell jokes. And I would say that they are really the first American humorists in many ways, at least in the way we think about it. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben, let him tell a couple stories here, and then we'll have a conversation.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. There's a thing about, trying to dissect humor. It never quite works. Somebody said it was like dissecting a frog. The frog dies and nothing much is revealed, but we'll take a shot at it and just talk about it. But it can't be an elusive thing, what's funny and what isn't. But it's certainly true that I think we Southerners have contributed greatly, or perhaps more than anybody, to the body of American humor and comedy, etc., in American life, and not just through comedians but through the great humorists. So Mark Twain is the perfect example, one of the perfect examples, and he remains. I guess he was born about 1835, I think. But he remains still a giant in American letters because he's funny. His stuff is funny. Larry the Cable Guy, whom I knew down in Atlanta a lot, when I was like, that's right. That right there is funny. I don't care who you are. That's funny right there. That right there is funny. And Larry's a good example. It's just a salt of the earth guy, and he worked a lot. Now, in fact, he had a TV show I was on, but the South, to me, is just rich with humor and always has been. And it's part of humor, I guess, is one way we managed to get through hard times. And the South has seen harder times than any other section of the nation, particularly in the late 19th century and well into the 20th century. We were sort of considered to be last in everything, and at the bottom of the social structure and all that stuff. But that's changed a lot. It's not only changed, but the progress is over right now. The South is the fastest growing the most prosperous, the most exciting area in the United States. And everybody's wanting to get a little piece of it, I think. But the South has always had humor. And that is a way of getting by. It's a way of coping. It's a way of dealing with difficult things, difficult times that we go through. And so I grew up in a house in a railroad shack, railroad property, and we didn't have any electricity. We didn't have any hot water. We didn't have any telephone. We didn't have any, heating to speak of. But we didn't know that. I mean, we didn't care. It was what it was. And, we had battery radios. And that's my first memory when you start talking about comedy is we'd all gather around and listen to something like the Jack Benny show on a Saturday night, I think it was. And there was Jack Benny's band leader was a guy named Phil Harris, who was a very, very proud Southerner. He's from Tennessee, grown up around Nashville. And that was his act, And so I related to that immediately just because, I connected with the way he talked, with the way he was. And so those influences are pretty strong. And but the South, what it went through was always the poor section of the nation. As the nation grew, it was agricultural, and the North was industrial, and they had all that zsa in New York and radio and Broadway and all that stuff. And down South, there was nothing comparable to that. But we had each other, and it didn't matter how hard times got because somebody could tell a joke, and it would lift your spirits. That's the purpose of comedy, I think, and of humor, is to lift our spirits a little bit. And we had the ability, unlike a lot of other cultures in the South, we could laugh at ourselves. And so many great comics. A good example, he was from Oklahoma, but Will Rogers was a good example of that early on. He was real laid back. He was whimsical. He was funny. He was a great storyteller. He was also a great rodeo guy with a rope. He was amazing. I've seen old films, Will Rogers doing rope tricks that he still haven't been matched, I don't believe. But anyway, we always had that humor. And the folk humor, Joel Chandler Harris and the Uncle Remus stories, which were old African tales that he learned as a child down in Georgia from the slaves, and he changed those into the Uncle Remus stories. Those things hold up today. Great stories. So we always had that. Nobody had much. Didn't have a lot of money, but we worked the earth. That's another thing. When you grow your own food, and that work that's involved in that is real work, and it's often day-to-day sort of thing. So we had that going, and we had that music, and we had laughing. It doesn't matter what your economic situation is, you can laugh, and you can sing. Those things are there for us. So I think the South was made for that because, it wasn't, it was hard work. It was always hard work. The South was. Agricultural society was like that. We didn't have a lot of manufacturing of any of that until the 20th century. But so people had each other and they had their families, and that's where laughter and humor really, everybody's equal then. Telling stories and sharing those stories, being able to laugh at ourselves, and but the South, it was a hard time. Had been through a lot. It had suffered a lot in the 19th century, and even so, it was still hadn't changed much when I came in about 1940, just before World War II. The South had not changed a whole lot. It was still an agricultural region, but country people, we didn't have a lot. We didn't have internet or much. We had battery radios where I was, and that was it for communication. So there's a lot of storytelling, a lot of joke telling and humor that went with that. It was really down to earth, and it had always been that way for centuries. It was a hard life in the South, in the agricultural South, particularly in the mountain parts of Appalachia. Those are hard times, and people just, humor was a way of getting by, and the South was rich with it. And the African Americans contributed so much to that, to the music, to the culture, to the humor. So that was just everywhere I was. Everywhere I went when I was a kid, I would hear that laughter.
Tell that Jerry Clower story
About
the light going out at the dinner table.
Yeah,
That's a good.
that's a
example.
Jerry Clower story. Who's one of our great storytellers. I can't remember. It's Aunt Pet's house, and they're all sitting around, big meal, and everybody's staring at the big ham in the middle of the table and trying not to take too much. And then a wind comes through and blows out the kerosene lamps, pitch dark. And in the darkness, there's this terrible scream. And when they get the lamp lit back, there's Uncle Versy's hand on the ham, and there's 5 forks in the back of his hand. So anyhow, Jerry Clower is a great storyteller. He's a good example of that. I did a show with him once in Georgia, and he came in. I was doing the Dukes of Hazzard at the time. I hadn't met him. We were talking. He said, what you been doing on Dukes of Hazzard? I said, well, we just had Loretta Lynn on our show. He said, Loretta Lynn. He said, son, I thought I was country till I met Loretta Lynn. I got it. She was country, from way back up in there. Eddie had to get back to the issue of humor. So we've always had those great humorists. Every newspaper had a humorist column, in the South particularly. So, it's just been there. And I remember growing up to listen to the radio, and there would be Homer and Jethro, somebody like that on the country station. There was always that comic thing going. Little Jimmy Dickens did some of that, these humorous songs. So that was always a part of the Southern culture, and from Richmond. And later, there was a televised version of it. It was Amos and Andy, which was the most popular show in the United States. And it came out of a couple of guys from Richmond, Virginia. They did dialect, and wouldn't do it now. But then there were black actors that did the parts. And it was a wonderful show. It still holds up. I saw one recently, and it's just a shame that the powers that be on the left and the woke people have disappeared Amos and Andy, which was a great contribution to understanding and fellowship and just American humor. But there you go. I don't know. I could go on about that. We did a television show that, really was more like a Western than a Southern. It was, it had all the action. I remember going to the Saturday, we'd go downtown Portsmouth, and we'd see the Saturday matinees. It would be a double feature, usually. First of all, this is just after the war, World War II, and this place would be packed. It's downtown Portsmouth, Virginia. It's in the biggest naval shipyard and all of that. So everywhere there's sailors back from the War Marines. And us kids would go down there for the Saturday matinee, and for like a quarter, you would get popcorn and a Coca-Cola, as we call them. And you get to see all the previews of coming attractions. Then you see the newsreels of what was going on in the world. And then you'd see a couple of cartoons, like Woody Woodpecker and Mighty Mouse, and then they might show Donald Duck, which I love. And then we got to see two Westerns. Now, the first Western, and they always had a comic sidekick, first one would be somebody like Lash LaRue or somebody like that. That'd be pretty good. But then the second show would be either Roy Rogers or Gene Autry, who was my hero, and they had those sidekicks. And Gene Autry's sidekick was Gabby Hayes. And so there was always this comedy thing going. And that's what the Dukes of Hazzard was. Basically, we were doing a B Western with cars instead of horses. We always had all that great action, but nobody ever got hurt, right? You fall off a cliff and have a truck land on top of it. Just go, I'm okay. Just nobody bled. Nobody used profanity. And there was, in those shows, there always have a real pretty rancher's daughter. And we had the best rancher's daughter you ever saw in Daisy Duke. So we were using that prototype sort of the B Western, the kid friendly, family friendly. You don't have to worry about what the kids are watching. There's not going to be any blood or profanity, and in the end, the good guys always won. And there was a lot of humor in it. And I think that kind of entertainment's pretty much disappeared. But I just, comedy, a lot of it's about timing and a lot of it's topical too. But some people are just naturally funny. Jerry Clower from Route 4, Liberty, Mississippi, was a great example of that. So humor, the humor that we used in the show in the Dukes of Hazzard was mostly physical comedy, but you don't see much of anymore. Guy steps on a banana peel and falls in a mud puddle. Well, if the timing is right, that's fun. You're going to laugh at it, particularly if there's somebody who's pompous. They were using that same gag in the Greek theater 2,000 years ago. And we had physical comedy, slapstick comedy, and particularly with Roscoe, with Jimmy Best and Sorrel Book, and Roscoe and Boss Hogg. And that never gets old. It's better. It's the timing. The timing's right. It's funny. So that's the kind of, humor, Southern humor. I think about Brother Dave Gardner and others like that. Andy Griffith. In the early 50s, there was a record that came out called What It Was Football. And it's this country boy who's talking about how he was just saw this crowd and he was looking to buy him a big orange drink and gets in this crowd and he describes with total innocence a football game. And that was his start, really. I had seen Andy Griffith when I was 6 or 7 years old, and I think about 1947, in a show called The Lost Colony, which is still plays today on the Outer Banks at Roanoke Island, North Carolina. It's about the first, Sir Walter Raleigh's expedition, which disappeared. And in fact, Andy Griffith was there playing Sir Walter Raleigh. And he went to the University of North Carolina. I ended up there too, many years later. And so I always, they were still talking about Andy Griffith. And I was doing doing the Dukes, and Andy Griffith I'd never met him. And Denver Pyle, who played Uncle Jesse, had worked on the old Andy Griffith show. He played Mr. Darling, the family would come down from the hills. And he said, yeah, Andy? I said, no, I've never met him. He said, well, he's doing a show, a couple of, big sound stages it's a couple of stages down from us. So come on, we'll walk down there and see him. So we did, and I watched him a little bit. That was kind of cool. We met, chatted a little bit. He was, I said, I knew he had a place on the Outer Banks. And I said, you still got your place in Antioch? He said, yes, I do. But that's the extent to which I got to know Andy Griffith. That was it. But he was very influential. He did a show called No Time for Sergeants, if you remember that, which was written by a Southern guy. And that's how he really got started. The show was a hit. Went to Broadway. It was a hit. They made a movie out of it, and then, he was on his way. So, he was an influence, I guess, simply because he followed pretty much the same path that I had.
Well, this is I had a couple questions for you as you were saying these things. One story you told me one time, and it's not television or stage, but it was a Jimmy Carter story. And when Jimmy Carter, with the dedication of his library in the Ronald Reagan, can you tell that story? Because it made me laugh out loud. It shows you that even in this serious time, and Carter, I know a lot of people have mixed opinions about Carter, and Carter is Southern to the core. I mean, that's who he is. And you and I have had some conversations about Jimmy Carter, but that story is great. It really shows you Jimmy Carter and that Southern side of him.
Well, they were dedicating the Carter Center in Atlanta. I guess this was must have been in the early 80s, maybe. Reagan was president, and President Carter had asked President Reagan to come down to speak at the event. So he did. And he was introduced, and President Reagan got up and gave one of the greatest speeches ever about the South and the new South. And Jimmy Carter represented all of this great metropolis of Atlanta. It was the heartbeat of the engine of the South. And he just went on and on. It was a brilliant speech, a standing ovation. I mean, people leaping. It was just wonderful. And he sat back down, and Jimmy Carter walked up to the microphone and said, "That's why he won." Jimmy Carter, I went
That's
to,
perfect.
that's why he won.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I got to know him a little bit down there, and went down to Central America, and that was a big deal. I went with a delegation that he led down there. It was extraordinary how wherever we went, in any country we went to, how much he was appreciated and admired by the people in their governments. I mean, the presidents of these countries, I mean, and all of them, they just really looked up to Jimmy Carter. And, I know now he's in hospice, and here's something about the South, I'll tell you, and the national media. I have heard Mrs. Carter call Rosalind Carter for 40-some years now, when her name was Rosalind. It's Rosalind Carter, and that's how I knew her when he was the governor of Georgia. Rosalind Carter, beautiful old Southern name. But I guarantee you, when she passes away, some guy will come on CBS Breaking or Fox, whoever, and say, Rosalind Carter passed away. I mean, she's a great lady too, but that's just typical. This first lady of the United States, and they didn't care to call her by take enough. What is that about? I don't know. Stupid, I guess. But anyhow, I don't know how I got off on that. And it is very funny, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the timing, the way he said that.
Ironic, not funny. It's ironic. Right. All those smart ass, pardon my French, hotshot reporters and media people in New York Times and CBS, and they're calling the First Lady of the United States by a wrong name for 30 or 40 years now. Duh. Oh, well.
Well, the timing on Carter's answer was perfect. As you said, timing. That was it. It was everything. Yeah. I had a question, and I know this is an easy one. This is a softball. Do you still keep in touch with the Dukes of Hazzard cast? And I know before we got on, you were talking about that. So people want to know.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's sort of what I do. After my congressional career, such as it was, I served a couple of terms. Uh, I went back and did some more films, and so a couple of good ones. I worked with Mike Nichols in Primary Colors, did some other things. Worked with Anthony Hopkins on Meet Joe Black, and did some TV. So and finally came back and I found a place up here in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Elma and I did, and I had this idea. She was a big, still is a big mover and shaker, and she was coordinating this huge thing in New York, a gathering of tall ships from all over the world, all these countries. So she was dealing with all these mucky mucks from Brazil and Portugal, all their naval attaches and secretaries of the Navy, and they're all sending these beautiful ships to New York Harbor on July the 4th of 2000, the centennial. And it's a huge thing, the biggest flotilla ever on the water. Given all of those ships and all of the other boats that came out in New York Harbor to see this.
Since D-Day.
Since D-Day, biggest flotilla ever. And my little wife did a little bitty little thing. She's the one who coordinated all that. So I'm back down here in the mountains, and I get this idea of I keep looking, the Dukes of Hazzard doesn't go away. If you're in the country and somebody say, hey, you guy played Cooter, I said, yeah. And all of a sudden everybody's coming around, wants to know about it. It is still beloved, because that's the way we are in the heartland of America. You like it? They always liked it. And that show still plays. It doesn't age. It's old boys driving old cars to begin with, wearing ball caps and blue jeans, and driving old cars on dirt roads. Still like that around here. So the look of it holds up. But I was talking, people started seeing me around the county here, and I said, yeah, you look like I played Cooter on television. Well, yeah, I did. So I got to thinking, this show is still very popular. And I said, I'm down here. I'm writing. I was doing a lot of writing. And so I was in New York doing this big shot thing. I said, well, I'm going to open me a little place called Cooter's. Get all this, because I had all these scripts and pictures and the old costumes and some props from the show. And I thought, well, I'll get an old General Lee, sit it out front, call it Cooter's, have a little Dukes of Hazzard museum, have make some music. And I told Alma's in Manhattan, being, a big shot. And
Impresario.
an impresario, she said. So I said, I'm going to start this little place. And she thought, that's fine. You go right ahead and do that. And, but, sort of like, she was sort of like, I got this big important thing to do. You go do that. So, okay, so I went down South Carolina and got this old General Lee and hauled it out, set it outside this place, got my costumes and scripts out, pictures from the show, hung them up on the wall, was selling apple cider and things like that. And so Alma is a big PR type. I said, let's do a grand opening. And so she contacted all the media about, say, Cooter's going to open a place down there in Sperryville. And she's back up in New York, and we open this place, and I'm not making this county at that time had 6,000 people in it. And we had, according to the newspaper, 10,000 people show up for this opening. They were coming bumper to bumper traffic all up and down the highways. And Alma looks at this and says, I better get with the program, So since then, we've just had, that was 1999, so 24 years ago. And since then, we made the Dukes of Hazzard a permanent part of Americana. It is beloved. It's finding a new audience. It's beloved all over the world. We have people who come to our store in Luray, Virginia, from Italy and England and South America. They love the Dukes of Hazzard. And the only reason, we're not on primetime television is because of the media and their woke allies can't seem to understand that flag is the Christian cross of Saint Andrew. They don't even know that. They haven't the foggiest notion what it really the primary meaning of that symbol is.
But do you stay in touch with everybody?
Oh, do I? Yeah. As a matter of fact, you asked me if I stayed in touch with everybody. Don't tell anybody. But Daisy Dukes right now just up the hill at her guest house. And she's going to be with us this weekend, and Lorraine. So yeah, we do. We all, over the years, like I said, we started shooting in 1986.
No, you started shooting in 70.
Oh, 78. Yeah.
78.
We started shooting, and I can't count back that far. I was a child actor at the time.
Childish actor.
Childish actor. Yeah, well, that's correct. We started, we got together in 1977, and this show came on the air in 1978, and that is 45 years ago. And we draw crowds of thousands upon thousands of people for personal appearances and things like that. It is a beloved show. And we're the whole time we're flying under the radar. We don't care what the media, we don't care what the muckety mucks at NBC or CBS. They won't touch it because they consider us to be politically incorrect. And I wear that as a badge of honor.
A couple people want to know if you knew Louis Grizzard at all.
Oh, yeah.
Or anybody that knew Louis Grizzard.
Funny guy he was. Droll. Yeah, I knew him slightly around Atlanta. Run into him here or there, drinking a beer or something like that back when I did that. And he was a very gifted, very, very gifted guy, and very, very funny. And he sort of he and that show, him and Jeff Foxworthy was in Atlanta too, and another great guy. And I used to see him at the Braves games, and we hit it off pretty good. Tell a story on Jeff. I was in Congress now, and who was it? Bush. I guess Bush had just been elected, but at any rate, Jeff is up there doing a thing. Maybe
we were at a big gala for Ford's Theater.
Yeah.
And we were at a party, and we'd all been at the White House.
Yeah.
And Linda Robb was there.
Yeah, so that's right. We're at the White House at this function, and Jeff had never been there. And he comes over, and I had, because I've been around Congress and all. I said, "You ever been here?" Yes, this is really something. And Chuck Robb and Linda Robb came over, and I said, "This is Chuck, and this is his wife, Linda." And he looked at Linda Robb and said, "You ever been to the White House before?" And I said, "Chuck, Linda here is President Johnson's daughter." And he looked at me, looked at her and said, "Can we start over again?"
That's funny. What about what about Laurel and Hardy? Do you know anything about go back? I mean, you're going back now in the earliest days of media, but
that's one of the first Southerners who really became a huge star was Oliver Hardy of Laurel and Hardy. He was from Richmond County, Georgia, down there near Augusta, a town called Harlem, Georgia, and he was just a regular guy out there, but he had a little instinct for performing. A great big old boy, and they called him Babe Hardy, and he, of course, became part of one of the greatest, what we would call a double act, like Abbott and Costello or Martin and Lewis, a double act. With Stan Laurel, who was his exact opposite almost. Stan Laurel's this little quiet, shy, acting Englishman who had come over with a lot of those British guys, like Charlie Chaplin, who had come over but they're standing, and there was magic between them. They just had great chemistry together, and they did a lot of silent movies together before they did any sound movies. But yeah, Oliver Hardy's father, back in 1861, was the Confederacy's recruiting agent for Richmond County around Augusta, and was apparently a real stout fellow. I mean, he was very prominent in that community down there. So it's, Oliver Hardy was talk about a son of a Confederate veteran. He was the very thing.
Right.
Yeah, there were so many great comics have come out of the South. But anyhow, it would be hard to top Oliver Hardy, I think, for prestige. And that stuff still plays. I watched some of that, I don't know, a few weeks back, and it worked. I mean, it's still funny. It's just, and they sang that, I forget what movie it was, but we live up here, and I do this on stages about every Saturday. In the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, on the trail of the lonesome pine. That was first sung by Oliver Hardy in one of their Laurel and Hardy movies. And so I don't know, I keep it going. I can't hardly get around. I don't get around very well. I've had so many orthopedic surgeries from my misspent youth and playing all that football and all those car wrecks on the Dukes of Hazzard. But I've had, I think, 6 or 7 knee replacements and a couple of spinal fusions and a hip replacement, and no telling how many concussions. So I've kind of slowed down, but I am going to be 82 in a couple of months, so it's about time. I mean, if you'd been 300 or 400 car wrecks, you'd look like this too,
Well, I got a question. You may not want to answer it, but the Dukes have had a couple of remakes in the last few years. What do you think of those?
Oh, dreadful, dreadful. Everything that the Dukes of Hazzard wasn't. In fact, I went on the Today Show when that first came, and I just said, went on national television, and I said, listen, these people spent a lot of money making this thing, and they think they got, and they had an enormous advertising budget too. So they were plastering the Dukes. I said, but don't take your kids to see this if you're expecting to see that show you watched, on CBS for so many years, because it was everything our show wasn't. They didn't try to do an homage to our show or a tribute. They showed no respect forever. They sleazed it, and it was just trashy. And it's just typical of the gap between the heartland of America and the Hollywood mentality. It's just two different worlds and two different ways of thinking. And I said before, I tried to tell them, if you do that, you're going to, I'm tired of being right a lot.
A couple other things here. And I think this is a great question. What do you think is the essence of being Southern? It's outside of humor, but just in your opinion, what is the essence of being Southern?
We talked about it a little bit when we're touching a little bit on when we're talking about the humor. We were people of the land, of the earth. I mean, that closeness. It was a rural area, and it was based upon agriculture, and it was basically every man for himself. So you had to get out there and you had to work if you're going to survive. It was hard work. And so I don't know about my people were, pick cotton and pull tobacco. And, I did too, did some of that. And they worked on the railroads. It was all hard work. And I think the closeness, you hear this, a cliche of being close to the earth, there's something about it that's not primitive or primeval, but it's basic. And it is spiritual. There's a spiritual aspect to this. I can look out the window right here where I'm sitting, and it's beautiful. It's lovely. It's green and birds are flying all around and there's critters out here and it's hot. How much said, and it's hot. I think that had something to do with it. Separated the men from the boys, you know. The men could stay down here and take the heat. The boys said, I got to get up there where, you know, freeze my can off from Pennsylvania or New York or something, you know. But the South is spiritual. I mean, you go back and read you're a historian, you know, that people talked about the deep spiritual qualities of Southern life. It wasn't just because they were going to church. It was because what you felt, you were close to the Creator and you were part of the creation and you knew it. There weren't many distractions. The beauty of the land, you know, the dirt, the hard work and all of that stuff is real basic. And outside of the cities, and I lived in Atlanta for many years, and it's a great city in a lot of ways. It was meant to be a city. It was that, you know, it was where traditionally the Creek Indians and the Cherokees would go down to the Chattahoochee River and they trade with each other. And so it was always all the traditional Indian trails that followed the path of least resistance, headed right towards where Atlanta is. And then first roads came along and the first railroads, it was the natural junction. So it's natural that there's an international city there now. It wasn't going to remain. But you know, outside of that, the South, you know, outside of those cities and that metropolitan and urban kind of sensibility that comes with it, the South hasn't changed. It hasn't changed much out here where I live in 100 years or longer. This place is the same. George Washington came here in 1742. He was 17 years old. He was a surveyor working for Lord Fairfax. And he came out here and laid out the little town, which they call Washington, Virginia. And now, I mean, not much has changed, except they put a fancy restaurant in town, which it's the most famous, highest rated inn in America. So people come here from, you know, from Greece and Italy and Finland, and they eat at this restaurant in town. It's not your regular, you know, ham and eggs kind of place. But anyhow, that getting back to it, we are born of agricultural, salt of the earth people, black or white or red, and we've all, you know, relate to the land. And I think there is a spiritual aspect of that. Obviously, there is. I mean, you know,
the food's good.
Yeah, Alman said, and the food's good. And that to me is a spiritual thing. The food,
I mean, those are the things that we win, right? We win at cooking, music, and humor. I mean, those really are the things that the South has. And as you mentioned, it's because it's grounded in something.
My old school where I went to college wins at basketball, and Tar Heels do. We win at football.
And we're the best looking.
Yeah, Alman and the best looking people too, as far as I can tell. Yeah, it's you know, it's one thing I wonder about. I said, well, all this love that I don't see people bragging about coming from the Midwest or the Northeast or you know, people want to say, I'm from Oregon and sing songs about it and write books about it, but we do. It's a real, genuine connection with the land, with the culture, with the history, with the whole 9 yards of it. And it's a love. And love is a hard thing to measure sometimes, and it's a hard thing to overcome. You can't do away with it, you know. And that's the way I think a lot of Southerners feel about it. And laughing, it got us through a lot of hard times, you know, keeping that family thing, keeping families together and laughing. And, you know, I could go through the poor sections of that town where I grew up. And, you know, people didn't have much of anything, but you could hear the laughter and you could hear the music. And those things to me matter more than anything else.
Somebody asked if you have any really maybe your favorite funny story from your time in Congress. If there's anything there, I mean, we know Congress is just so ludicrous at times, but anything that you think is just funny.
Well, there were a lot of funny things happening, but nothing, nothing really springs to mind. Do you remember anything, honey?
Oh, I think I remember when they were talking about George Herbert Walker Bush or something. Oh, I know.
Wait a minute, I'm getting help here.
No, I know what was funny.
There was a lot of funny things.
Well,
but,
when you ran for Congress, it was funny.
yeah, it was.
And you said you had more bones than the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
But you also
I have to tell them when I first ran, I said, there's something going to need to understand about me. And I've written a book about it, so it's no great secret that I was a full-blown raging alcoholic, dope smoking, fist fighting, insane man until I was 36 years old. And I was dying from booze. And my life changed that morning. So it was a spiritual experience. And I've not had a drink since then. And immediately my life turned around. Within a year, I was on the Dukes of Hazzard. I guess maybe 8-10 years, I was a member of the United States Congress. So, and I was close to death from the life I had led.
But when you were running for Congress, you had to say.
Oh, yeah. So when I was running for Congress, in my first speech, I was asked about, is there anything we should know? I said, well, tell you the truth, I've got more bones in my closet than the Smithsonian Institute.
Tell them about the pot.
You know what? Oh yeah, they asked me if I'd ever smoked marijuana. I said, well, I tell you the truth, I did experiment with it a couple of times. Once from 1958 to 1965, and another time from 1967 to 1980. So, but people, and that's another thing. We get back to the South and the humor. They can laugh at that, but they also knew that if you've lived long enough and been through all that stuff and can talk about it honestly and humorously, that matters in our culture. I think it mattered. Yep.
What about people are asking about Southern pride publicly? How do you do it? I know that you went on. It was one of the most embarrassing shows I've ever seen of stupidity. When you went on right after 2015, you went on a program and they asked you about the flag, and you had this little talking head there and two on the news, and they couldn't believe that here's this old guy on here saying all these terrible things. And they had a conversation and they were really giving it to you, at least they thought, but it was embarrassing for them. So how do you, you're in the public eye a lot. How do you show your pride in the South? And I mean, at this point, you just don't care, I know, but how do people want to know this because they feel like they can't do that a lot of times?
Well, we sort of have to. We have to, that old thing, be true to your school. We've got nothing to be ashamed of. People who really, as you do, and many of us do, who really sincerely study the history of the United States and understand all that went before the war between the states, how everything that went before affected that in some ways, and how everything since then has been affected by it. It was the biggest thing that ever happened in this country, the crucible of the American experience. And yet we survived it and we went on. And my people fought in the Revolution. They fought in the War of 1812, in the Mexican War. They were patriots. And they felt that they were doing absolutely the right thing. And in the context of their time, they were going out to defend their state and their family and their town and their friends. It's easy to look back in retrospect and play, the winners thing, how we were all hateful, slave on. And the more you study this stuff, the more you realize, wait a minute, slavery was a northern enterprise. We were down here picking the cotton. The banks were floating all these, the growth of it down here. They were running the slave racket and all that, bringing those poor people in on boats, selling them south. And then all the cotton went north to the mills in New England, where it became the biggest export ever in American history. The North was getting rich, and we're down here picking cotton and getting all the blame for it. But that's real history.
So how do you keep your cool?
Oh, well, you just say what you. I say what I think, and I usually, in debating these people, particularly these talking heads that just want to yap at you, I know a little more history than they do. I've actually studied it. I've actually read it, and I did that because we want to be certain of our opinions. We should want to do that. Let me research this. I might be wrong. They might be right. Let me look into this. But most of these people, particularly the news people, they're the worst. They just, they've got a little few talking points that some producer slid in front of them. And they have no idea what they're talking about. And they're just trying to attack you to make you look bad. But I'm 82 years old and I got scars all over me, and they, nothing they can do or say to me is going to bother me at all. You've been in a car with Roscoe P. Coltrane, you've seen,
Well, that's actually a good segue in the next question. What's your favorite funny story from your time on the Dukes?
It's hard, I've been asked that a lot, and there's the whole experience. It was so much fun.
The funniest thing is when you were in Congress and nobody cared except they wanted to all.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. I tell you, I get to Congress, and these senators and ambassadors and all these people are saying, "Oh, is that Catherine Bach? Is she going to be visiting you here?" So no, a show like that, and as I mentioned a while ago, that time there were only 3 networks, and now there's 420 of them or whatever. And on Friday nights we were getting ratings that people would dream of now, that don't happen anymore. 30 to 40 million people were watching us on primetime every Friday night. But I do my homework. I'm a book guy. I've got thousands of books, and I read them. And as I've become more and more quote unquote handicapped, not able to get around, I used to play basketball every day and run 10Ks, play softball, and now it's the remote control. That's about all the exercise I get. So I read. I catch up on my reading, and if I'm going to debate one of these people, I do my homework. Y'all are the homework.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. Somebody asked, how'd you go from a railroad shack to a TV star and U.S. congressman? How'd that happen? That's an amazing story in and of itself. How'd you go from that to that?
Well, I had to tell you a story. I had extraordinary parents, particularly my mother. My mother, we didn't have much, so she was, and we were poor, but she would enter these contests, and she would win. And one of the things she won, I'll tell you the story because it's sort of like, this is in 1951. I'm about 10 years old. She won a trip to Hollywood to be on a radio show called Double or Nothing. I mean, here we are living in this railroad shack with no indoor plumbing, no electricity, no phone, just soot coming off the rail yard. And here she is in Hollywood, and they said, the host of this Double or Nothing show said, "Well, Mrs. Jones, what would you do if you were a grand prize winner?" And the grand prize was like $140 or something, in those days. She said, "Well, I sure would like to get some electricity in our house back home. Now, everybody on the Atlantic Coastline Railroad is listening to this, right? Because I know Mama's going to be on this national radio show. And by the time she got home, they were running a line from the freight yard to their section house where we were. And that's how we got electricity.
Huh.
But how did you get to Congress?
How did I get to Congress? Well, that was the start of it. I was smart and got out of high school, but I'd already started, I mentioned the alcoholism. I'd already started doing that. And just was a feckless, awful student and barely got out of high school, but I took some night courses. And then a friend of mine said, well, you know, East Carolina College, which is now great, it was then a good school in Greenville, North Carolina. It's now East Carolina University. He said, and I was working, I had a job sticking sticks and popsicles, and I had another job, you know, just doing assembly line work, making Halloween masks and things like that. So he said, you can go down to East Carolina and they don't require any college boards. All we got to do is pass the entrance exam. So I took the entrance exam and passed it and got into East Carolina College, where I continued to, you know, just goof off and carouse. But while I was there, I showed an aptitude for writing, and I really got into it. And I saw a catalog for the University of North Carolina in the East Carolina Library, and it showed these people pushing cameras around and studying scripts and being television and movie people. I said, radio, television, motion pictures, that sounds great. So I just wrote a letter to the Dean of Admissions and told him why I wanted to go to the University of North Carolina. And I was accepted. It's one of the best schools in the country. And I go, and the Dean of Admissions said, that letter you wrote, that was one of the best letters I've ever read in my life. He said, you know, so that was it. It was just a talent I had. And that's where I got more involved in theater and film and movies and acting and all that stuff and writing. So it was just, the answer to the question is, you know, it's a higher power. It totally was looking out for me. And it's a higher power that when I was dying of alcoholism on the floor in Atlanta, I prayed to God and higher, I got, you know, next day. It's just, it's a story that a lot of people might not be able to believe or relate to, but it's really true. And somebody else will say, well, you're just lucky. And I'll take that. I'm lucky. I am lucky.
We're getting right up near the end, and I want to tell you a story that somebody that I worked with told me one time with the radio. You mentioned the radio early on and how that was such a early part of your life. Well, her parents, she's probably close to 80 now. She's retired. But when I first started working where I work, she said, I'm going to tell you a story what happened when the wireless came in this area. They call it the wireless. Now, all the programs were out of Ohio. Here in Alabama, they were coming out of Ohio. They didn't have any local programs. So her grandparents didn't understand that it wasn't a two-way. So as these people would come in, they thought they could talk back. So as all these people from Ohio were speaking on the radio, they started yelling at it. We hate you, Yankees. Get off our radio. We don't want you down here. So they couldn't figure out that was that was just one way, and they couldn't hear what they were saying. But they thought, we're just going to tell these Yankees off, and they're going to go home. But this has been a lot of fun. And
one of those clear channel 50,000 watt things just sent all over the country. Yeah, that was one of the downside of radio is all those Yankees appearing in your front room there on the box. That was a great education. Huh? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, this has been a lot of fun. I just wanted to keep it for an hour. I know your time is very important, and we appreciate you coming on with us.
See that? This is from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? WEZY Radio, home of the Papio Daniel Flower Hour in Tishomingo, Mississippi. The real story, of course, Papio Daniel was a politician in Texas who was not well thought of after his, he sold it. He, never mind. It's too long a story to tell now. We'll come back and do that another time.
All right. Well, we'll have to have,
Good deal, Brian. I hadn't seen you for a while, catching up here like this.
we're going to have to do this again then.
Stare at your computer and talk.
We're gonna have to do it again, and you'll have to, since everybody asked, you'll have to bring all the Dukes of Hazzard cast on. We can have a reunion.
Yeah. Well, y'all come up to Cooters. We do that every once in a while. Get a whole bunch of the gang together, and we do great music and carry on. CootersPlace.com.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and
I'm gonna say that 3 times. CootersPlace.com. Cooters plural place.com. That's twice. Okay, that's enough. What did you say? I'm sorry.
we recorded it, so it'll be up on YouTube. Just to let you know, you can go out and catch it there if you want to see it again. But this has been a lot of fun, and we'll have to we'll do it again. We're gonna have to get you back on and have some more. Just have another chat about everything. And we got a lot of questions didn't get answered, so we'll have to get to those.
Well,
But,
I can talk the chicken off the bone.
Well, we will definitely have you back on, and thanks everybody for coming out, and thanks for giving us your time tonight, Ben. It's been a lot of fun. And
Thanks, y'all. Thanks for watching. I'll go give Daisy Duke a big hug for all of y'all.
all right. Well, we'll see you later, and thanks everybody for coming out, and we'll see you for the next webinar. See you then.
Down and I'm gone.
Good night.